program, I was a high school teacher in Salinas, and I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to figure out ways of developing and recruiting new teachers in our area, specifically in our community. And so when I came here, I was like, okay, I know what I want to do. I'm going to see how each of these classes will help me to get to that end result that I wanted. I went from, when I first started the program, really knowing what I wanted to do, to kind of feeling like, ooh, wait a minute, what was it that I wanted to do again, and how does the study and what I want to do later on fit in with that? So it took me a while. I struggled to find my own voice, I guess. And it was through the class that we took where it was talking about our dissertation proposals and structuring them that finally I was like, I got it.
Unlike Anna, I wasn't so focused. I don't come from an education background, so when I got in here, I thought, okay, I want to do something with STEM and equity. When I started, I think you all know Dr. Badway, right? Mm-hmm. I think that was my kind of savior, because she offered me a position on her research team as a graduate student, and her research was promising practices in STEM education. And at first I thought, oh, this is great, that's exactly what I want to do. I didn't connect it to my dissertation. I didn't connect the dots. But as it turned out, part of the work I did for her ended up to be my dissertation. And I was fortunate in the sense that, one, it provided me the area to explore all the research I could do, but also that was my job. That was my part-time job. And I also got a job here teaching in engineering, which was fortunate because I didn't have to go somewhere else to teach, but that was also a part-time job. So unlike other people where they have full-time jobs, I had part-time jobs, and one of them was to do my dissertation. Mm-hmm. So that was very fortunate. I think that's why I ended up being able to do it in a timely way.
I knew when I came in what I wanted to do too. I knew that I wanted to talk about this, the focus that I normally work in, which is community schools. I knew I wanted to talk about that. But when I first got here, I let myself get sidetracked because there's a lot of pressure. Like, there's pressure from below and there's pressure from above, as I'm sure you guys have already felt. Like, you have your own internal pressure to get through this program, but you also have all these kind of options that come your way that you don't really know. I didn't really know what was viable for myself or what would be a better thing. Like, maybe I should drop this. Like, I was trying to be open, and never does me any good to be open. I should just stick with what I know. I ended up coming back to what I started to discuss, which was shared leadership. And so we went through this QE process, and we were the QE7. That means 7 of us failed. I was one. My son was born right at finals. Like, we planned it so that he was going to be born after, and he came 5 weeks early, and that was pretty much that for that process for me and then they let us do it again, and then we passed. But really, that was all that was I could do at that moment, was what I did. So QE, we flunked, and then we got it back together, and then as Anna and Armine was saying, you have this whole other process. Dissertation proposal is more drama, and one of the things that Barbara can attest to for me is that I'm a big time procrastinator. Any procrastinators in the house? Any procrastinators? Yeah, that's right. Be proud of it. Procrastinate. Hey, I'm a big time procrastinator, especially if I don't understand what I'm doing. So if in my job I understand what I'm doing all the time, I'm a leader in my field. I talk all over the country, all kind of stuff. But in this damn thing, I was not. I was not a leader in the field.
And I think for me, I did do the little at a time, because I kind of came in knowing this is what I want to do. So each class, I'd figure out, like, how am I going to use my paper in this class to push me forward in my dissertation. And I was very fortunate that my professors were on board with that. They're like, go ahead and do that. So whenever I would get stuck, I would go back to my papers and be like, cut and paste. And then just doing that.
I mentioned how your paper for Mary Perry was at least the skeleton for your paper 3.
Yes, absolutely. To the point where I was like, this is the Frankenstein paper, because it was Mary's paper, plus I think it had elements of my qualifying exam, plus it had elements of brand new things that I had to go out and do.
about choose your dissertation committee very carefully. I lucked out. I don't know how I lucked out throughout this whole program, but it's the dissertation committee that really makes you or breaks you in a sense. I think my dissertation was the best experience I've had throughout the whole program.
I think that expertise in the area that you're studying, so for instance, my papers were, the first one was an evaluation case study, and Barbara was the lead in that, so she was my natural chair. The second paper was narrative inquiry, so the second committee member was Daniel. And then the third paper was a policy program proposal, so our policy professor was a natural fit.
That's a perfect example.
So everybody had their area that they could advise me on, make suggestions, and then when I would revise papers, I'd have their classes in mind already, like, okay, the literature that we had covered in the class, or some of the ways that they proposed that we structure our papers, so it was a little easier in that sense. And then keeping in constant communication with all of them helped a lot in the process, especially the defense.
That's really important.
I mean, there are many kinds of ways you can formulate your committee. What you want, again, is to think about how you work and what you want to get out of them. It's not just pile people in, it's not get who they tell you, it's not any of that. It is it's be intentional about it. What do you want for how you work, and then what do you want them to do for you? So for instance, if you're not the kind of person that wants a whole hell of a lot of feedback, don't get the person that gets you bunch of line edits on your papers. You do not want that person. If you're the person who really, really likes attention, you want the person who has time. You want that person to be on your committee. If you're a person who just, wants a combination, you just have to be really, really intentional and tactful about what you think you want to get out of your committee members. Some of my committee members, I have one guy who said, send me all of your papers at the same time. I have one of my third person who says, send them to me as you get them done, and then I'll read them. You just have to figure out what works best for you. So it's not a just remember, do not pile random people onto your committee.
That's right. And they have to work well together.
And they have to work well together. And that's something that you don't know. So you have to be kind of proactive about that. You have to ask people about the people.
I read my dissertation chair's dissertation, and she had done student perspectives on Navajo student perspectives on language. And mine was basically student perspectives, technology student perspectives on the kinds of projects that they did. And so there was a parallel there, but more importantly, she wasn't a STEM person, but she helped me pull these three papers together in a way that were publishable.
I didn't talk on the phone that much with Barbara. I would come over here because it would give me 2 hours of driving from Salinas to the East Bay or here San Francisco, and in those 2 hours I would process what I was going to say, and then I'd meet with her for a couple hours, and then I'd drive back and process again. So that was a really important thing for me. That
it was also a kind of a deadline, because you'd bring me paper, instead of it being sort of like, oh, let's just talk, it would be like, oh, I'm driving 2 hours, I better have some text.
Absolutely. So that's how I got around it with my other committee members. One of them lived in San Jose, so I would go see her a few times. Daniel, I would email with, and he was pretty responsive. So I think because I was putting that extra effort of like driving, paying for parking, it made me more accountable to myself. Like, I better have something to show my committee members, otherwise it's like, what am I doing? So.
But the dissertation was something that I felt that all throughout was something that I could feel that it was a challenge, that I learned something from, and in some odd ways allowed me to connect the dots between what I'd studied in the past, in other research that I'd done, with what I was doing now, and hopefully what I could do in the future. In my case, it was very clear why I should do papers for publication, right? Because I was working on this grant, and the idea was to publish, or at least have a manuscript that would be considered publishable. And I come from an engineering background where in the hard sciences, it's not unusual to do dissertations which are 3 publishable papers.
If I publish these papers, and I definitely wanted to publish something. So if I publish these papers, this is going to be important to the people who do the stuff that I do. And so I wanted it to be in chunks that they would be, nobody's going to sit up there and read my whole daggone dissertation in 5 chapters, but they will read. I have a paper that talks about the history of the things I'm talking about. I have a paper that is the actual application of what I'm talking about, and then I have kind of policy paper as well. So I know that these papers will have 3 different uses, and that 3 different audiences at least will find them useful.
I'm sorry.
And for me, I think because my end goal was to develop some kind of a teacher pathway program in Salinas, I had to approach it in terms of how each paper was going to allow me to do that. So my background is as a high school English teacher. So when somebody comes up to me and says, well, Anna, how do you know that this is going to work? I can reference my evaluation case study and see, here are some ways, here's what's been done across the state, here's how it can apply to Salinas. So that would be the one chunk. And then it's like, okay, well, if somebody were to ask me, well, how do you know it'll work here in Salinas? I can reference my second paper. So I can talk about some of the personal and professional traits of homegrown educators from this area that I studied and how those can help us develop a pathway. And then when they ask, well, how can you incorporate all these aspects of these models? Then that's my third paper. So the intention was to build on something so that at the end I could put it into practice. And in my current position, I'm the administrator for the teacher induction program in my county, and I'm using all of that when I'm networking with people from the university and other educators, leaders in our area, and using each part of the paper for a different audience, and then with the intention of eventually combining it all and getting a conversation started about working collaboratively.
So it really is, what is your intention?
Yeah.
What do you want from your dissertation? Mm-hmm. Are you just writing it because you want to get out of the program? Do you have, for instance, I had people that want me to write. I had people in my field, they were like, I'm waiting for this paper, I want you to talk about this, we want to know about that. Like there was demand for it. And so it really does depend on what you want out of, what is the use of your dissertation for yourself.
Well, one approach that my cohort had were that a group of us would have these study group staycations. So we would say, okay, we're going to work on the paper for this class, and we'd go to Big Sur, and we would get our work done there, and then we would give ourselves time to say, okay, at this time we're going to stop, we're going to take a break, we're going to go for a walk, a hike, dinner, and then come back to it later. And we would do that like kind of all over California. And then we would come together and after classes as well. So when the Saturday class was done, we would go, each one of us would pick a restaurant in San Francisco that we've been dying to try, and we would talk dissertation and go over some of our topics. We would talk about our research, and then we would just have fun afterwards. So we were able to have that balance of like spitting it out to people who understand and want to hear it, and not have to bog down, our friends and family that don't necessarily want to hear it, and they want us to be present for Thanksgiving or Christmas.
We went to breakfast, right? So this is 3 of us who have been, we've consistently brought up the rear, but that's a whole other thing. We all went to breakfast with Armin as a superstar, and we're sitting there, we're talking, we're discussing how these 2 of them didn't have a date. I already had a date, and then all these things. Long story short, we got discussing, we got activated, everybody got motivated. We brought Barbara in, and
Everybody
now
calls me on the phone.
and now,
You got to deal with this. I'm like, what?
and now we all have dates to defend. Yeah. Like, we got to move it all through. I'm telling you, you guys are your best resource.
Yes. And sometimes even communicating that you're having a rough time, just keeping that line of communication open. Like, I think I fell off the radar for a few weeks, and I was like, okay, let me just send everybody an email saying I'm trudging through this stuff, I'm having a little bit trouble in this, but I'm going to get something to you soon.
I think one thing, the things I realized was that this whole thing is a meaning-making process, not just for you, but for your committee members. And they all, some of the ideas are new sometimes, and you want them to kind of get a sense of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. And to be able to communicate that often, or in a way that you would both come to a consensus about what it is you're doing, and then take that to your chair and kind of have a discussion about it, was my way of it. When I walked into my defense, whether it was the proposal defense or the dissertation defense, there were no surprises. I knew exactly where we were. I knew that whatever everybody had thought was incorporated in those papers, there was no surprises.
And
And I think the surprise that I found
It's Thursday.
in the process of
Yeah.
defending was
Thursday.
that
Thursday.
my committee had my best interests at heart. They wanted me to finish on time. They wanted me to go deep enough to be able to complete the process and not get like bogged down with minute details. So they reined my study in a little bit more, and so I felt like, okay, we'll do it this
Right.
way.
And so people usually make a PowerPoint, some kind of presentation software to talk it through, but you don't need to. I mean, people all have the papers in front of them. But, and if you do presentation software, you want to try to use good communication techniques so you're not putting 400 bullet points up there, because we just read your paper. We don't want to see it in bullet points. You're trying to tell a story, as both Armine and Carol were saying, it's part of your meaning-making events. You're telling them, here's who I am, here's where it matters, and here's how I got here. So you've got about half an hour to present, and then your committee chair tries to fend off questions in that first 20 minutes or half an hour to let you have your piece. That doesn't always work. Then you go to questions from the committee where they're asking you or pressing you or whatever they're doing, they're asking you about your study, and that can be 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And then you go out of the room, which also happens in your proposal defense, and the committee takes between 10 minutes and 45 minutes to talk about what they should do, how they should respond to what you've just presented.
It's a very
and
long
they might
wait.
be like, fine, we're ready to sign. That's sort of one extreme, and the other is almost fine. We'll all sign, but Barbara's going to hold the papers until next week when you finish that XYZ that we need. And the third is great defense, but you've got to make these major changes before we're ready to sign. And we want to see a new draft, and so that's what Anna and I were working out, how to, in the next 2 months before the summer term was over, to finish the new draft and get it all signed off.
I need to know.
You know what you kind of have to be ready to defend is the why of how you're going to do it. So whatever your methodology is, you don't have to know all the nitty gritty, Saldana said this and, Seidman said that, you don't have to know all that. But you do have to say, I'm going to collect this information, I'm going to analyze it this way because, and that's what they really, and I felt like that's what they really wanted out of me, is to know, you could say, I'm going to use grounded theory, we had a discussion about that in mine, you could say you're going to, do interviews, but they just want to make sure that you understand why you're doing it, and then however you're going to analyze it, why you're doing it that way.
So let me just add one more thing. The most important thing in my proposal defense was the logical connection between the three papers.
Yeah.
That was the most important thing. Each paper had to justify the other. And if you can't show that, that's where things would get clogged, if you can't show that. And the rest of the stuff, you have to have, but that logical connection is really key.
With your methodology also, this is where your research question really you really got to have a grasp on it. Your methodology has to track back to your research question.
Yeah.
So you got to be able, whatever you're doing is going to have to be able to answer these questions. And so that's part of the why. You got to be able to say, so I'm doing this way because it will help me answer. Mine is on equitable integration of community-based organization voice in leadership structures.
Yeah.
How are these interviews and these whatever going to help you answer that?
And your lit review has to reflect that too.
Yeah. Whatever you decide to do at the end of this, whether it is to put it on a shelf and never see it again, which I'm really leaning towards, or having to go out and start this publishing process, sooner or later you have to defend it again. You'll have to defend it again. You'll have to look at it again. You might want to look at it again. You want to make sure that it makes sense for you. So if it makes sense for you, this is why you did it, and it still makes sense a few, weeks later or months later, then that's why that stuff is important.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
All right.